Welcome to English for Engineers. I'm your host, Olivia Augustin. Tune in as I dig deep into all things technical English, business English, and international business communication to bring you a lifetime of knowledge in a digestible format. Bonjour and welcome to a special crossover episode of English for Engineers. Today we're mixing things up a little bit with French flair and a deep dive into the mind. I'm Olivia Augustin, I'm your host, and I'm thrilled to welcome our guest, a fantastic French coach who's also guiding the next generation of language teachers. Kathy Intro is an entrepreneur and a certified professional Neurolanguage coach. She hosts the podcast My Polyglot Life en français to help upper intermediate and advanced learners study French efficiently and, most importantly, with joy. Born and raised in France, she immigrated to Canada in 2009 and is now based in Montreal, Quebec. She speaks French, English, Spanish, some Japanese and German, and she has lived in Europe, North America, and Asia. She was a speaker at the conferences Women in Language and Language in Mental Health in 2021. Not only is she here with us on English for Engineers, but I'll be joining her on her own podcast to explore neurodivergent communication skills for engineers. So sit back, tune in, and let's unlock some insights together. Kathy, welcome to the English for Engineers podcast. Thanks for being a guest here as well. Did I forget anything in your introduction? Do you want to add something?
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much. You mentioned I train the new generation of teachers to become neurolanguage coaches.
I'm really looking forward to you explaining what neurolanguage coaching is, because I see that thrown around on LinkedIn quite a bit in the last couple of months, and I didn't have the time to really look it up. So I'm glad that you are here and you can explain it not only to me, but also to the other engineers. So what is neurolanguage coaching?
So I think there's about 1,000 of us coaches now in the world, and it's growing because more people want to join this new approach that blends, as the name says, neuro is for neuroscience, so knowledge about the brain, language expertise from the trainer, and coaching. It's a coaching approach both in the way we approach the learning process, like a project where you set goals, an action plan, you do goal reviews, and you evaluate how you're doing in the process, and you readjust what needs to be adjusted. But it's also coaching in the communication style. So traditional methods, learning methods, you have the teacher is top, learner is down. Neurolanguage coaching is a more horizontal approach. We're partners in this project of you improving your language skills.
I like that. Can you give us maybe an example? How would that look like? Because most of us are used to that top-to-down teacher-to-student relationship and teaching.
Yeah, so it starts from even the first session. We do a language diagnostic. And we have a short conversation to see what you can do in the language. And then even it's not me telling you, oh, here are your strong points and here are your weaknesses. We already then have a conversation, like how did you feel in this conversation? What would you like to improve? What would you like to work on? And you have this initiative. You can take the initiative. If you don't know, you can ask, well, I'm not sure, tell me. And then I would share my own perception of what happened. But from the beginning, we try to empower the learner and give more autonomy, because I know French, I know English, I know the language, and I can teach whatever you need. But if I'm teaching you something you don't need, we're just wasting time. So tell me what you want to learn. And then we'll make a plan together and we'll make sure you reach your goals and you improve little by little.
So without knowing it, I applied the techniques of neurolanguage coaching for the last 5 years, at least in that introduction part of a language course. And I love that so much. Yeah, because grown-ups know what they need.
Exactly. They don't like being told what to do, especially engineers or people who are used to managing people. They kind of have an idea of what to do
and taking the lead. Yeah. Have you ever had a situation where you asked a client, how do you feel about your language and what do you think you need to improve, and they said, like, you're the teacher, you tell me, I'm paying you for that information?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. How do you handle that?
So you explain, like, for sure I can do that if that's what you want. I can have that role, but just know that in order for you to acquire the language quicker and to target your actual needs, not what I think your needs are, then we recommend that you start developing your own self-assessment and have that metacognitive approach on what you're doing and how you're doing things. So I can take the lead in the beginning, but then usually what happens is as we work together, you start, as the client, you start seeing things that you would like to do, or, oh, could we do this instead? And then the dynamic changes.
Yeah, that is my experience as well. Interesting. What else is neurolanguage coaching? How does it... It's not... How... Because a lot of students, especially from Western and Central Europe, they want to, can I test something? And can I have a book? And can I do homework? And you mark my homework. And I'm like, that's not how communication works. And I don't like marking stuff. So, and I don't like tests that much because it's not the real world. So how can you show your students in that neurolanguage approach or coaching that they're making progress?
Yeah, good question. And we develop a benchmark. So when we meet at the beginning, we set indicators, like KPI, key performance indicators. How would you rate your fluency today? How would you rate your vocabulary? What else do you want to track? What else do you want us to track? And we set numbers. Could be for numbers people, it can be on the scale of 0 to 10. What scores do you give yourself? If they want me to share my input and give a score as well, I can do that. It's not what we recommend because we want the learners to stop seeking that external validation, which is what we do in school. We want to make the teacher happy, our parents happy. But in this approach, we want the learner. The reward is the learning itself. You don't need someone to put a stamp or a grade. You may need if you're passing, if you need to pass a test. You will need that, but that's a different approach. So first is setting the KPI and then reviewing every month, every few weeks. We sit down and we have a look at what we've been doing.
Yeah. And sometimes it's measurable in with numbers, and sometimes it's measurable in time, and sometimes it's measurable in feeling.
Exactly.
How confident you feel.
Yeah, feelings are very important. People underestimate the power of feeling. Like, describe your feelings today, and a few weeks later, how do you feel today? Well, much better.
Yeah.
And usually it's powerful because they see results in real life. You don't need to get a certification if your colleagues start speaking to you in that language instead of switching to your common language. If your clients are learning English, so if people start talking to you in English, not stopping to ask, oh, did you get that? That's a sign, that's a tangible sign, but you need to pay attention to those small victories and those signs that you are progressing.
It's interesting that you say that those feelings are so important, because very often when I ask my clients, how do you feel about the I'm feeling, I'm an engineer, and then they go on and explaining stuff to me, and then suddenly they say, yeah, when I have to speak in English, I feel like a baby, and I'm like, so you feel suddenly. Good, there you go. And then later on, after a while, we're working together, like, oh, I felt so confident. But that confidence oozes out to the whole meeting room, and then they're taken seriously as engineers. Interesting. So you also have a master's degree in communication.
Yeah.
How is that different? What all the stuff you learned regarding your master's degree, how is that different to being a neurolanguage coach now? The approach of communication, or are there a lot of similarities?
So I think I'm a bit neurodivergent as well, and I've done many things. I've done so my master's degree was in politics and communications. So there was, I think this brought me the French rigor in how I approach essays, writing, reasoning, arguments, and all that. That's transferable skills that I still apply today. And I apply it to the language learning, or when people prepare for French tests, I can help them do that. And then I worked in marketing, events, organizing. That was...
again, communication.
Yeah, again, communication and helping people, the customer relations. That's something that's very important to me. Then I had a bakery for a while in Vancouver, BC. I had a French bakery. Learned baking. That's another language I speak. And this, I think this was more about sharing the culture. And this is the link with my current job, was about building a bridge between me as a French person and food. Canadians need some education to approach French food. There are cultural misunderstandings in that domain as well. So that was my contribution. And I was employing mostly Francophones at the time. So finding French employees or Francophone employees in BC, I happened to work with people who had very limited English skills. And they were still, one of them, she had very poor English skills. Like, she could barely speak at the beginning, but she was one of the favorites of customers. She had such great customer skills, and she was so warm and friendly. People didn't care if she couldn't understand everything sometimes. And as she worked for a few months in the bakery, her language skills grew because she was engaging so much with the clients. She was just speaking and learning on the job. And it shows the power of just putting yourself out there.
So important, just speaking and building relationships. And then even all the worst grammar mistakes are forgiven if people feel that you are honest and honestly interested in them. Yeah.
And I also worked with a couple neurodivergent people, autistic people. And here, they knew the language, but they were afraid of speaking. They had a block. And here, we worked on self-confidence, on creating a nurturing environment, because we needed them. There's no one else, so I need you to help the team and be a part of this team. We're counting on you. And that also was so important in helping them get out of their comfort zone. And in the end, that person was also, she was hiding at the back at first, and then she went to the front and helped customers in English. And her English was fine. There was nothing wrong with her English, just the self-confidence. Then I started teaching English to Francophones. And as I think, like you are doing, I had this intuitive approach of what works. But then I felt I needed more material, more theory to back up what I was doing. And that's when I got into neurolanguage coaching, knowing about the brain.
It's interesting that we both had a similar approach, and you already did dig deeper, and I'm going to do that in the future. But I have a question now that's kind of building up on what you said right now. So you are a French teacher. You teach English to people with a French background, but you also work with a lot of neurodivergent people and with people who are 50 plus, or like, okay. So a lot of my clients, engineers, are 50 plus. A lot of them also not. And even though they don't tell me, but I would guess a good 70-75% of my clients, I have a hunch that they are neurodivergent. It might just not be obvious because they're working with a lot of other neurodivergent engineers as well, and they're all in their bubble and don't realize that they're different. But what do you do differently when teaching people who are a bit older? And because normally we learn languages between 0 and 20 years old. And there are those statements sometimes that the easiest to learn a language is before, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years old. And then it gets progressively more difficult, which is not my personal experience, I have to say. I found it getting easier with 30 plus to learn new concepts and languages. So what do you do differently with people who are a bit older and with people who love systems and who like to dig deep and don't like to just learn the rules? Yeah, me too.
I love systems. So I'm happy with someone who loves systems because I believe that's the best way to learn is to understand the system behind the language and the culture and then practice.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to lie, it's usually a little slower for people who are older, like 50 plus, 60. It doesn't get faster. But that's when the system comes because that's a satisfaction. You may not be able to learn as fast as when you're a student because when you're a student or fresh out of university, your whole life is about studying. So you just continue doing what you're doing. When you're 40, 50, you have other things to think about. Your job, it's already a complex life, no time, kids, or you just empty nester, but then you say, what do I do? Learn a language?
Elderly parents, whatever is coming up.
Also, so you have so many things to juggle with. There's very little time for the language. And I think the first thing we work on is being kind with yourself. Acknowledging that there are facts in your life. This is the situation as it is. We're not looking for excuses like, oh, I couldn't practice because this or that. Sometimes it's real. Sometimes you could prioritize differently. So then we work on prioritizing the language or working on certain parts of the language. Working more on writing or speaking or vocab, we select what you need to work on and then you make time for it. You find time and you commit to it. So that's the first step. Being kind to yourself, organizing your studies, and then taking a systematic approach. So we don't work on everything at once. You select one grammar point or one conversation you want to have, and then we practice that. Then when you feel more comfortable, we move on to the next, then to the next. Then we review what you did at the beginning, because that's the thing we need to review. And many people tend to just continue. They continue chapter after chapter after chapter. But then you need reinforcement on what you've already learned. So I found that planning for 1 week where maybe you don't take a lesson that week, but you block that week to review the material from the previous weeks. That's really helpful.
And take time to review as well. Yeah.
Take time to review, yeah. And if we talk about the brain, the structure of the brain, what's happening as you get older, it just doesn't travel as fast. But you have lived more, you have learned more things, so you can make more connections between things, and that can help you remember. But the information doesn't travel as fast. The circuits, the new neurons don't connect as fast as when you're young.
So if you, regarding that, taking breaks and reviewing things and being patient with yourself as well, that I want it all and I want it now, I guess that's not working anymore then when you're getting older. You have also worked with a lot of engineers. Have you experienced that engineers learn language differently? Or that they have a different approach, or that they think they have a different approach or want it differently?
Let me think. I think they're very curious and like to know how things work.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they were not used to doing that with other teachers. So then when we start doing that and they see that I can walk them through the process, then I think, yeah, they're happy and they become curious about the language itself. And then it becomes, just another system to crack. One thing that the pitfall of that, so they're very interested in the system, then they might get carried over and too much into the system and don't get enough practice, system.
Yes, that's very, very, very true. I'm just thinking of a new student I have, and his writing is excellent and his understanding of written language is really good. But he was using a word and he pronounced it incorrectly. He pronounced the double O as oo. And it was I knew what he meant in the context, but I wanted to tell him that's pronounced differently. And I told him the word with I'm not saying what word it was because maybe he's listening and I don't want him to think I'm calling it out. And I corrected him and I said, I pronounced it with the double O as ah, as a longer ah. And he said, pardon? And he didn't understand the word. So he was so good on a systematic technical base of the language. But so very often when I'm speaking to him, I have to use gestures. So I pointed to my mouth and to my ears and I said, we have to train your mouth and your ears. Your brain is perfect, but the input and the output, that's where we have to work on.
Yeah. And I find that, so on one hand, I find they tend to progress fast because once they get interested, then they go into a bit of hyper focus and start consuming a lot of content, a lot of material in French or in English for Francophones. And then the learning, it's like we have this Pareto rule of 20-80, 20% of your effort produce 80% of your results. Similar in learning. You learn 20% actively, but 80% is passive exposure or your subconscious doing its wonderful job. Your brain is a fantastic machine. You need to trust it.
Yeah, exactly. Trust it. And one thing I don't know if you tell that or if that's your approach as well, but very often I tell my clients, if you're done with courses with me, I want you to be able to do self-study in the future. You don't have to come back. I want to make you independent. I want you to understand the basic system in a way that you can always fall back to the system. You don't have to retain all the detailed information, but I want you to know where to look it up. Yeah. And very often I start a lesson with, just for your information, you don't have to remember it. And that relaxes them so much that they listen really carefully. And it's good.
Yeah. It's not rote memorization. It's understanding and knowing where to find the information.
Yeah.
And what I found is that it's even better to work in periods of time. So let's say we work 3 to 6 months together. Then you take a little break, you go live your life and continue. You've reached a plateau and you're going to have fun on that plateau. And then you'll hit another frustration and you'll need my help to go up another level. And then you come back and we continue that approach at a higher level. So it's a spiral. You learn more and more and you go up steps. But there are certain periods of time you'll stagnate or you'll just have fun doing what you do. And that's fine. And then you don't need to be on it all the time.
Exactly. It's not a race. It's exactly. Yeah.
And if I may add something about neurolanguage coaching, what we do also is make the neuroscience or share the neuroscience. I've read articles, so I know kind of what's going on in the brain, and I share it with the learners so they can understand what's going on and get to know their own brain, especially with neurodivergent people. Everyone's different. I don't know what your strengths are, what you're good at, what appeals to you. So if I give you the information, then you can react to it and we can make an even better collaboration.
I really like that idea because, again, you emancipate your students. You make them independent from you and give them information because they're all grown-ups and they're all smart enough to make their own decisions. And they're all smart enough to, I believe, they're smart enough to tell me as their teacher what they really need.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not the superhero in this story.
Yeah. Sometimes I might have the outsider insight. So there's something that is right in front of you, but you don't see it until someone tells you, have you noticed that this or that happens?
And sometimes in my experience, sometimes there are new clients, new students, and they're so insecure and I really need to improve my English. And I'm just there and I'm thinking, you don't need me. You really don't need me. Your English is great. And they just lack a bit of confidence. And then after 2 or 3 lessons, they're like, boom, flying high and far.
Yeah. And I have clients like that. And even if they come to that realization, they still continue because they just want to go deeper. That's their style. And who am I to say you don't need to go deeper? If you want to, yes. Yeah. And we'll challenge you in ways that you don't know is possible, or that's where my expertise as a native speaker or someone who knows English and different cultures, that's where I can help you break that upper level.
But very often it's that they come for one thing, and normally I do lessons in 10 lesson blocks, and after 2 or 3 lessons they figure out and I figure out that you're good at it, and then we switch the goal. We aim for something different, and sometimes they come for job related English course, and then we switch to reading classic literature together and analyze it. And sometimes it's just I call it a coffee break and talking about their projects and just keeping up their fluency. But being flexible, I think, is very, very important with students.
Exactly.
The world is stressed enough. Yeah. So you are, we already mentioned it, a French teacher, and you're living in a French-speaking part of Canada. Can you tell us a bit about language difference between French and Canadian French, like misunderstandings, maybe funny story, but also between language etiquette and cultural difference? I think that's obvious between Canada and France, that there is a cultural difference, not what the difference is. But can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so there's Canada, even Canadian French, they're North Americans first. We share a language, which is French, but culturally, French people from France going to work in Quebec are shocked, and they live a true cultural shock, even though they speak the same language. Yeah.
Can you give us an example?
The hierarchy. It's more France is more vertical. Management style is more hierarchical. Yeah. And you have to get approval, 10 signatures to do anything. It's really hard to move up. Pay increases are also slower. So it's old Europe. It's not as dynamic as North America. It's really hard to fire someone, even if the person is not doing their job. In France, it's really hard to get rid of someone who's slowing the team down, which has good sides and bad sides, but it's a fact that it's really hard to get fired from a job once you're in a permanent contract. And it's also harder to get a permanent contract in France compared to Canada. And in Canada, I think there's there is a cultural difference between English-speaking Canada and Francophone Canada.
Okay.
Often my clients, if they come from Toronto, from the English-speaking part, and then they end up in Quebec and work for a Quebec company, they tell me things like, they're very French. The management is very French in this company.
And you think, no, it's not? Or is it?
It is. There's an influence of the style, the French style has infused a little bit in the Quebec. It's still more relaxed than France. When a French person comes to Quebec and their boss starts to use the informal you, so the tu instead of vous, they don't show up. They can wear t-shirts, or the clothing style is more relaxed. Management is more horizontal, and you can also, if you work well, in my experience, if you work well, you can climb the ladder a lot quicker. And in France, I feel there's a lot more office politics, is who you know and who you're friends with that's gonna make your career. In Canada, it might happen in some companies. If you're not on the boss's good side, you can be blocked. But you may find another company, because the job market is usually more dynamic and fluid. So you can always change company, get a raise, get a better job, and then move up the ladder in your career. And yeah, I'm not sure what makes a company more French in Canada, but it comes with the language.
Maybe the coffee
also
is better.
Maybe the coffee, the pastries are different. Not even, because Canadian food... There's something they have in Quebec, for example, that's called 5 à 7. So it's after work, 5 to 7 p.m. And it's you go out for a beer, or you're hanging out. The company might throw 5 à 7 for their employees, and you have a beer or a drink of some kind. A bit more... Casual. But
would that happen in France?
It happened in the company I worked with. Maybe not inside the company. You would go out with your colleagues. Yeah, I found that in English Canada, and when I was working in the western part of Canada, it's more like you have your colleagues at work, but you don't really see them at work. But maybe it's just my experience. Maybe.
How do you not see them at work?
No, you see them at work, but they don't become
work,
friends.
Yeah.
In France, I've become friends with my coworkers quite often. Not as much in Canada, unless they were other foreigners.
Interesting. What would be, let's say, you're born and raised in Europe, as a European who is working with people from North America, let's just keep it as a whole, or moving there, what would be I have to get all my ducks in a row and all my thoughts in a row. What would you advise the average European, that does not exist, but for the sake of the argument, should they be careful about when they're moving or working with Canadians? Is there something, or like, ooh, don't do that, or be careful with this and that?
There's one thing I can think of, and I'm sure that would apply both to French people and German people, and it comes to performance evaluation.
Okay.
So every year you have your performance review with your superior, and you go over what you've done well, points, room for improvement, and all that. And my experience, and that of other friends that are also European working in Canada, is that the room for improvement part is so subtle that sometimes you come out of that meeting thinking, oh, they're really happy, I've done such a great job, yay! And you're fired 2 weeks later. And you're like, what happened? Yeah, so I feel like if you ask your boss for a meeting to go over what you're doing and how you could improve, they may be so soft in how they word their opinion, or they don't want to be too directive, they don't want conflict, they want to be supportive. So they practice what they call the sandwich method, where you have a compliment, something that's not great, and then compliment.
Yeah.
But it's lost in the middle, and sometimes even the wording is so soft that you just don't get the root of the problem.
Yeah. And I guess France, Austria, Germany, Netherlands, feedback is quite direct.
And for French people, if I feel we give negative feedback, we don't give a lot of positive feedback. Mm-hmm. So if you don't get anything wrong, you assume you do a good job.
Yes. There's even an Austrian saying from Tyrol, nicht geschumpfen ist Lob genug, and that means if you're not criticized, that's praise enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see how that could lead to misunderstandings. And the other way around as well. I could imagine people from North America working with Germans and Dutch and French people, that they are like shocked to getting super negative feedback, and we're like, I'm just stating facts. I don't know why you're mad at me. Yeah.
But there's one advantage I found, that a lot of the French employees, French workers I know who work in Canada, have been encouraged to develop initiative. In France, you can have initiative, you can show initiative in your job. You may not get rewarded because someone else might take credit for it, or you'll be like, oh yeah, that's great, thank you. And it stops there, no raise, no promotion. But you're doing a good job, thank you. Whereas in Canada, initiative may get rewarded because, especially if you know how to present yourself and present your initiatives and put yourself forward, they might see that positively as something, oh, this person shows initiative. Maybe we could give them more responsibility or give them this project, and you get more opportunities. That's my experience.
Maybe even the thought, we have to keep that person in a company because they're pushing the whole company forward.
Yeah.
Interesting. What was that? Oh, I had just a question in between, but I lost it again. It will come back later. Is there... Oh, no. Now it's back. Goes very fast today. Being direct feedback. One of the... I always do that exercise. Not always, but very often I do an exercise with my engineers, especially when I have a group, is sending emails. And I give them 5 minutes. They get a special topic, like a situation. They have to write an email, and they're sending it in the chat to me directly when we have an online lesson. And then they read it to each other. And then the last group course I had an engineer from Poland and engineer from Brazil and others as well, but they were reading their respective emails. The Portuguese email from the Brazilian engineer was really, really polite. It was almost like US level politeness, and the Polish email was like bum bum bum. So it was so, and their reactions were so funny because the Polish engineer, and they were lovely guys, and they liked it really. We had a nice, good vibe in that course. And the Polish engineer was like, "Oh, that's so soft. I could vomit almost. It's too sweet. Just give me the facts." And the Brazilian engineer was like, "Your email is kind of rude and shortcut." And then they were joking around, and I said, "Hey, Olivia, how would a German write that?" And I said, "A German would write, 'Hey, John, no.'" And then they said, "Okay, how would a Dutch write that?" And I said, "A Dutch would write, 'John, comma, no,' full stop." So even shorter and more factual. So how do French Canadians communicate? Do they have that starting sentence, "I hope that email finds you well. How was your weekend? Blah, blah, blah." Or are they to the point in written communication?
They do have some of the English communication style, which we could call Anglicisms, like something you would not find in an email in French. J'espère que tu vas bien. I hope you're doing well. So we do keep those little elements of English, but it's written in French. So we're within the framework of the wordy French language. And that's something I realized when I'm working with Francophones, learning English and having to write emails in English, and they tell me, "I want to improve my English writing skills." Okay, number one, simplify your text. This is French. You don't need that many words. Just do simple. You can do simple. Go the easy route. Yeah. And with the English speakers, I do have the other problem, like the other way around. I have to make them soften their communications and add more. Well, here you're saying it in the present tense, but it would be more polite in the conditional. This comes off as a little bit
harsh.
direct. Yeah. Or you could word that in a negative way. Oh, couldn't we do that instead of we should do that? No.
No, yeah. It's funny how much, and even if that's the point, even if it's grammatically correct, it's the tone that makes the music.
English communication is so much more efficient than French emails. My gosh.
I have another question that would correspond to technical English. I don't know how it's in French, but in German, at school, we kind of get trained to using synonyms, to not repeat the same word over and over and over again. That's considered bad writing. But especially when you're working in the work field, when you're working with an international team, using a lot of synonyms could use to confusion. So I always say, you're not here to win a Nobel Prize for Literature, you're here to finish your project on time and successfully. So use the same word over and over and over again if it helps to clear up things. How is that in French? Do you use a lot of synonyms?
Yeah, ideally you want to write well in your emails as well. You want to avoid spelling mistakes because people are really quick to judge you on your language and equate spelling mistakes with lack of intelligence. Mm-hmm. So that's something everything with French has to do. That's an extra obstacle for people learning French, is the fact that French people are usually very judgmental, especially on the language. Mm-hmm. But as a foreigner, you kind of have a pass. It's not like you're a French person with no education or with dyslexia, but people don't know about it and just think you're misspelling everything. Mm-hmm. And my advice is use the tools that we got. There's a really good tool called Antidote, or that's the equivalent of Grammarly for English. Use that. Cool.
Yeah. That's that's my advice as well. But is French using synonyms?
Yeah.
A lot of? Is it considered good writing to use like, I don't know, whatever, rain, precipitation, downpour? What different words for rain? Or is it that you say rain all over again?
In writing, we would try to avoid repetitions. Mm-hmm. We would word or change the order, the word order, frame the sentence differently, to construct the sentence differently to avoid repetition.
Makes it different for language learners, I guess.
Yeah. The main obstacle with French is the formality of the language. Sometimes it's almost a different language when you write a formal email, especially if you're not happy. Complaint emails, it's so long and useless in my opinion. I'm Canadianized in this regards now. I go to the point.
I'm Dutchified with my complaints as well,
But in French, you need to explain why this is a scandal. And because it's also harder to get a refund or something. So and you have to build your case.
Yes, you build your case.
And impress, like you puff the feathers and be like in your writing.
Yeah. I used to be really, really good in German complaints. Really, really good. But it doesn't work in the Netherlands. I really had to completely change my style of complaining to get what I want. In German, you have to be top to bottom, like really be slightly condescending even. And in the Netherlands, I always have to start like, I know you, it's not your fault, you're just a customer service person on the phone for today, I hope you can help me. It's a complete different approach. Again, not grammar, not vocabulary, but the tone makes music.
And I think Quebec is a bit in between in that regards. They do have that approach of, well, maybe it's not your fault, or they're a bit softer. But especially also in speaking, the spoken Quebec French and the written is quite different. Written Quebec French is standard French, is more similar to the French from France. Mm-hmm. But when they speak, when they have meetings or informal Teams chats and things like that, this is the informal language. And this is another language. It's like casual Parisian and casual Montreal French. they're two different dialects. Yeah.
So what are the, if people with an English background and they're learning French, are there Canadians who grow up with English and know French and then moving to Quebec and have to learn French?
Yeah, most of them have had an introduction in, they start quite late. They start around 10 years old and then they do 3 to 6 or 7 years. But most of them don't see the point and the method isn't great. So most of them don't speak when they come out. But I see the difference, though, with Americans who had zero French and Canadians who had this French at school. They still have a base we can work on quicker.
It's actually kind of embarrassing. My cousin used to live in Canada for 13 years, but I don't know anything about it. Are there Canadian French movies or TV shows or that you can watch to kind of get into that? Because for me, it sounds very different to French.
It is, yeah. It is the vowel sounds, the rhythm, the way they shorten sentence words, and the words themselves are different. And there's a huge production, Quebec French Productions. It started in the 1960s, 70s. They wanted to reinforce the francophone identity in Quebec. And so they put a lot of public money and subventions to francophone projects. So there's music, podcasts, radios.
Oh, nice.
Everything in French, yeah.
Cool, I didn't know that. Learn something new every day.
And that's why the 1960s French in Quebec, when you listen to the TV from the 1960s, they make an effort to sound Parisian on TV. But so the journalist is speaking like this standard French and they interview random Joe on the street and he speaks with a heavy Canadian Quebec accent.
Oh, that's hilarious, I guess.
But now even journalists and TV, they do speak with the Quebec accent.
Nice. So they've found their identity. I guess it's an independent language. If it has slightly different grammar, different words, and it's a different language.
Yeah, there's a lot, because most people speak both or have to speak both. The structure of the sentences evolves also to be closer to English in Quebec French than in French from France.
How many French speakers are there in Canada?
I think it's about. So Quebec is around 10 million, I think. So about a third. And then there are francophone communities outside of Quebec as well. And there's not a rivalry, but Quebec is not super inclusive of other francophone communities in Canada. Because then politics come into play.
Yeah. Wherever humans are, it does. Thank you so much, Kathy. That was a really interesting dive into French Canada today and Neurolanguage Coaching. Kathy, where can people find you?
So I have a podcast as well, as you mentioned, My Polyglot Life en Français. That's in French for French learners. And the one that we did together is called Crossroads, La Croisée des Chemins. This is for a podcast with multilingual guests, and we dive into identity and the guest's field of expertise. And with you, it was engineers, neurodivergent, and how to learn languages and navigate cultural differences. So that's what we did. And my website is mypolyglotlife.com. Instagram, LinkedIn as well, Kathy Intro.
We will put all the links in the podcast description as always. Thank you so much. I had so much fun talking to you for 2 hours now on your podcast and on my podcast. And maybe we'll do that again in the future.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you so much.
That was it. That was English for Engineers. I'm your host, Olivia Augustin. Talk to you soon. Me again. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review. To stay up to date with English for Engineers and get more behind the scenes content, make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't already, and sign up for your free English for Engineers newsletter on our website markhoda.org, or use the link provided in the episode description.